But ultimately, the Trump regime recognized that this war is going nowhere, and it is devastating the global economy, and it's going to devastate the US economy if this continues.
In today's video, Professor Marandi shocks Piers Morgan on Piers Morgan Uncensored as tensions rise over the US-Israel-Iran conflict, questioning whether the war has actually led to a costly stalemate rather than a clear victory. Professor Marandi points out how the regime remains intact, global energy markets are shaken, and key leverage points still favor Iran. So let's dive in and watch how Professor Marandi shuts down Piers Morgan on Piers Morgan Uncensored.
So the United States claiming overwhelming victory, but with a slight caveat on the battlefield. My take on this is that I think the United States and Israel have had overwhelming military success on the battlefield, but there's been an asymmetric war going on, which has involved the Straits of Hormuz and also the neighboring Gulf countries, Gulf states, where Iran could legitimately lay claim to have been very successful in responding to the military threat by effectively paralyzing the globe economically in terms of the energy coming through that strait. What is your take on this?
My take is somewhat different. I don't think the United States won militarily, and of course the Israeli regime has a much smaller military. The United States focused mostly on civilian targets, and since it failed to destroy any of Iran's underground missile bases, and it failed to destroy its underground drone bases or the factories that produce them, and that's why for 40 days Iran's missiles and drones were being fired 24 hours a day. Because of that, they were frustrated and they were constantly bombing civilian targets. In fact, yesterday, they bombed a synagogue. And I think that that has not been reported anywhere in the Western media, but they completely demolished a synagogue in Tehran. And that's just one of thousands of places that have been targeted. Very near my home, they destroyed a building with a bank, just apartment buildings above a branch of a bank. And they've been doing that across the city and across the country. So I think it's a military failure. I think it's a political failure. And of course, they forced Iran to shut down the Strait of Hormuz because those Arab family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, they were complicit in this war. They provided the United States with bases. They allowed them to use their airspace. They allowed them to use areas outside the bases to attack Iran. So Iran obviously would not allow their ships to go through the Strait of Hormuz. And when Iranian oil and gas and critical infrastructure was struck, they'd be hit in response. And of course, Iran was striking the Israeli regime 24 hours a day, as we all know. So I think that the United States and the Israelis, the Israeli regime, failed catastrophically. It was they who changed their position. Trump said initially that he wanted unconditional surrender. Then, after evolving his position, he gave a 15-point plan. Iran rejected it. And then he ultimately, last night, accepted that framework, the 10-point plan that Iran gave as a framework for negotiations. That doesn't mean we'll have a deal. Iran is not naive. And Trump already attacked this twice as we were negotiating. So Iran is prepared for renewed war. But it is a major achievement.
You can feel how the conversation shifts from raw power comparisons to something deeper about strategy and perception. Sure, on paper, the United States overwhelms Iran militarily, but history shows that overwhelming force does not guarantee control or long-term success. Iraq and Afghanistan are perfect examples where superior firepower did not translate into stable outcomes. Geography, asymmetric tactics, and regional alliances can level the field in unexpected ways. And that is something often overlooked in these discussions today right now. At the same time, there is a valid point about how narratives are shaped globally. Media framing, sanctions, and diplomatic isolation all influence how conflicts are understood by the public. Iran has been under heavy economic pressure for years, yet its political structure remains intact, which suggests internal resilience that cannot be ignored. That does not justify everything the government does, but it does highlight that external pressure alone rarely produces the political change many expect or promise during these debates in real world today. What stands out here is that focusing only on military strength ignores economic fallout and global ripple effects. Disruptions in key routes like the Strait of Hormuz can spike oil prices worldwide, affecting everyday consumers beyond the region. That kind of pressure creates political consequences at home, especially when people start feeling it in gas and food costs. So while the rhetoric leans heavily on strength, the reality is more complex, and that nuance is what often gets lost in heated exchanges like this.
I mean, the major achievement is that the regime that rules in Iran remains intact. And the issue I would certainly have with Pete Hegseth and the others, including President Trump, when they say that it's a different regime because it's different people at the top, I would imagine it's crystal clear that it's IRGC. They remain the regime. It is just a question of different people, but they're all part of the same regime. Would you agree with that?
No, I think the Islamic Republic of Iran is quite clearly it has a constitution. The leader is the person in charge. In fact, he was the person who made changes to Iran's proposal, and ultimately it turned out to be the 10-point plan. We have a president. We have a chair for the Supreme National Security Council. All of these institutions are very important. And I think the most important thing, though, Piers, which will ruffle your feathers, is that the Islamic Republic of Iran, whether you like it or not, has a high degree of popular legitimacy. And during the first week of the war, after Ayatollah Khamenei was martyred, it was basically the people who were on the streets who kept everything running. It took a week for us to elect a new leader. Of course, during that week, the Constitution provided us with a three-man leadership, but it was the people who were holding things together. There are no queues or lines at the gas station. No one went and rushed into. None of the people rushed into supermarkets. Everything was as normal. And every night we've seen millions of people on the streets throughout the country, on the streets, defending the armed forces, defending the leadership against this aggression.
Can you envisage a situation as part of a deal where Iran voluntarily gives up all its enriched uranium and where it cedes control of the Strait of Hormuz?
No, Iran will continue to enrich uranium within the framework of international law. It will be willing to have a deal. We already had a deal to have extra supervision if anyone is truly worried. But remember, Joe Kent, when he resigned, he wrote in his letter, and he was a Trump appointee, a senior intelligence official. He said that Iran was no threat to the United States. He said that Iran was not developing a nuclear weapon. And he said this war is about Zionist pressure in the United States and the Israeli regime putting pressure on the United States. This is was a completely unnecessary war where the Americans murdered many, many Iranians.
At this point in the discussion, the focus shifts toward how power is actually exercised beyond raw military numbers. A country can dominate in terms of budget and equipment, but that does not always translate into control on the ground. Iran has built influence through indirect strategies, including regional alliances and non-state actors, allowing it to project power without engaging in direct, large-scale war. That approach has proven effective in conflicts where conventional superiority alone did not decide outcomes, showing that strategy often matters more than strength. Another important layer here is how long-term pressure shapes behavior instead of breaking it. Sanctions and isolation have been in place for years, yet Iran has continued functioning by adjusting its economy and building alternative trade relationships. Countries under sustained pressure often become more self-reliant and less dependent on Western systems. That can reduce leverage over time, because the more adaptable a system becomes, the harder it is to force change through external restrictions alone, especially when those restrictions are expected and planned around. There is also the global economic angle that cannot be ignored in situations like this. Rising tensions in key regions immediately affect oil markets, shipping routes, and insurance costs. Even the threat of disruption can push prices higher, and that impact is felt far beyond the Middle East. Consumers in different parts of the world end up paying more, turning a regional conflict into a global economic issue that governments cannot easily contain or control without consequences.
Donald Trump has said that these are red lines, particularly the enriched uranium. If what you say is true, and the Iranian regime will not give up that enriched uranium, it sounds like there may not be a deal. So what happens then?
Well, the Trump regime has said many things in the past, and we have been a victim of two wars due to the Trump regime and the Netanyahu regime. And we have come out on top on both occasions, and the world sees that. And we are prepared to defend ourselves in future again. And Trump, by carrying out this war, at the behest of the Zionist and Israeli regime, they have badly damaged the global economy, which is going, and it's going to get a lot worse. And as we speak, in fact, Piers, although Lebanon is a part of the agreement, and that is something that the Pakistani prime minister has said openly and in a tweet, the Israelis have been slaughtering the people of Lebanon all morning, carpet bombing cities just out of rage. And yet Trump then goes out and says Lebanon was not a part of the deal, where in fact it was, and the Pakistani prime minister said so. So we're dealing with ruthless people. We're dealing with people who are utterly immoral, who have constantly said they will destroy Iran, obliterate Iran, send Iran back to the Stone Ages, and of course, delete or erase an entire civilization. This is what we're up against. But ultimately, the Trump regime recognized that this war is going nowhere, and it is devastating the global economy, and it's going to devastate the US economy if this continues.
Of course, all the things you've just said, many people would apply to your own regime, the Iranian regime. But Tehran has apparently said today, in the last few hours, it will withdraw from ceasefire if attacks on the Lebanon continue. That's from Iranian state media. Can you confirm that if these attacks in the Lebanon continue, then Iran will withdraw from this agreement on the ceasefire for 2 weeks?
Yes, Iran has already said that it is shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, and it will also punish the Israeli regime if this continues. And the talks won't go anywhere if the terms of the ceasefire are not implemented.
As this part of the discussion unfolds, the conversation clearly moves beyond simple comparisons of military strength and starts focusing on how modern conflicts actually play out. It is not always about who has more troops or weapons, but how effectively those resources are used in complex situations. Iran has developed strategies that rely on mobility, regional positioning, and indirect responses, which allow it to challenge stronger opponents without engaging in direct full-scale warfare. That kind of approach makes the situation far more complicated than it might seem. Another important factor is how global politics are deeply interconnected in situations like this. Any escalation involving Iran does not stay limited to one region because it immediately affects trade routes, alliances, and diplomatic relationships. Countries with strategic interests in the Middle East closely monitor every move, and their reactions can influence how events unfold. This creates a chain reaction where even small developments can have wider consequences, making it difficult for any side to fully control the direction of the conflict once it begins. The real issue is not just about immediate outcomes, but about what happens after tensions rise or actions are taken. History shows that conflicts without a clear long-term plan often lead to prolonged instability rather than resolution. Economic pressure, political backlash, and humanitarian concerns tend to grow over time. That is why focusing only on strength misses the bigger picture, because the real challenge lies in managing long-term consequences rather than just short-term actions. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center, are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.